welcome to the MessianTics Podcast, a podcast about all things Messianic Judaism. Each episode, we will be sharing our opinions as we tackle some of the biggest issues in Messianic Judaism. Now, here's your hosts, Rabbis Eric, David, Jonathan, and Toby. Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of the MessianTics Podcast. And this is going to be a little bit of a different avenue that we're going to run down today, as this episode officially kicks off the beginning of the third year, the beginning of the third season of our podcast. And I don't know about you guys, but thinking about the fact that we've been doing this for 2 years, because it doesn't feel like questions and answers that have come to us, and it's been that long. But the reality is over 2 years, we send desires and so on for the Messianic movement, for the greater body of Messiah and what have you. And we started the entire podcast off to begin with the very first episode, sharing our own testimonies and how we came to Messianic Judaism, how we got involved in rabbinics and so on. And so as we kick off this third season, this third year of the show, we thought we would take this a little bit of a different angle and just share a little kind of year or two in review of our own personal lives and ministries and what's happening, and the ups and downs, the goods, the bads, the pains, the uglies, all the things that we've experienced over the last year or two since we began the MessianTics Podcast, and I guess to some degree add kind of a humanity note to who we are, rather than us just being some voices on the other side of your speakers. Give you a little insight and a little window into to our lives and who we are. And so I will say this, just to kind of kick off the conversation, the reality is, and a lot of our listeners don't know this, but for at least Rabbi Toby and I, even the beginning of this podcast, like when we first kicked things off, was a really awkward season for us, because our kind of Rabbi Toby and his wife had just moved to the area and had just been officially made the assistant rabbi at CMC, and then almost immediately we ran into this huge issue with somebody trying to sow a split in our congregation, and I mean, there's a lot more that goes into it. I don't want to go into too much detail on that, but even the beginning of this whole run with the podcast began with this big hurdle that we had to get over and work through. And I won't forget the first day when I showed up at Toby's house to pick him up to come to Brenham to record that first thing. We had just that morning gotten the message from the people, the couple that caused all this issue in our congregation, saying they were leaving and here's all their whatever. And I show up at Rabbi Toby's and he was like, "So what are we? Are we still doing this thing? Like, what do we do?" I was like, "Yeah, we've got to keep going. Like, I don't know what else to do, but right now we've just got to do something that takes our minds off of it." And we all have different ways that we approach things in general, but our time with this podcast has not always been the most jovial, per se. There's definitely been some ups and downs. And so we just wanted to kind of share some of who we are and where we are right now, what we've gone through, or in goods and bads over the last couple of years, and so on. So,
yeah, when it was suggested that we do a podcast just catching up over the last couple of years, I started thinking back, and I realized that for both of our congregations, both of our ministries, both of our lives personally, the last 2 years have both been some of the best 2 years we've ever had, and some of the worst 2 years we've had. But at the same time, we've both seen and had congregational issues that were significant, that weren't not just somebody who left, but somebody significantly part of our community that either walked away from our congregation or walked away from the Lord, or both. At the same time, both of our congregations, we were just talking the other day, both of our congregations have seen significant growth, significant financial blessings coming in. You guys are about to buy a new Torah scroll or in the process of buying.
Yeah, well, we've already bought it. We're waiting on delivery. Yeah.
We're buying one ourselves. Our buildings are. So when it comes to the things of congregational life, growth, new people, discipleship, our congregations gelling and working together, and the unity within our congregations, I don't know that, at least for speaking for Brenham, that we've ever been at a stronger place over the last 2 years, while at the same time we've had deaths. We've had people move away for various reasons, both good and bad. We've had people leave for reasons, mostly that were things that I considered bad, but not, So it's interesting when you can look at all the bad things that have happened and really get weighed down by them and miss out on the fact that neither of our congregations have ever been stronger. We've had different things, like you guys have started a really great B'nai Mitzvot program and things like that have happened during this time. We've had bar and bat mitzvahs go on during this time. There's been weddings going on during this time. We've had babies born during this time. So there have been a tremendous amount of blessings, but it also has been, honestly, two of the most difficult emotional and personal years of my ministry, and I know from speaking to you guys.
Well, I know we've also seen a lot of adults kind of come into their own too. Like, we have several folks who are, have gone, back to school within the last, since we started this podcast. And they're now finishing up degrees and are going into careers that are going to be for the betterment of them and their families. So, we're excited to have watched those happen as well.
And we have one of our young ladies that just last Saturday was her last Saturday with us, because she got accepted to go to medical school out in North Dakota. And she's been with us since she was 5 years old.
Yeah.
And now she's going off to medical school, and her whole family will be moving to North Dakota this next week. Yeah. So you have the bittersweet. You look and you go, wow, this young person is so exceptional.
Right.
That even at her age, because she's younger than the normal age to go in, she's excelled in academics and life. And now the whole family's leaving that we've had a relationship with since she was 5. So it's a really difficult thing emotionally, because you're dealing with the joy of success and loss at the same time.
Right. Yeah. I was Catherine. I got on to me the other day because I was, because Abigail and Levi live out in Nebraska. And so I confused where she was going with Nebraska. I was like, oh, she's going out, because she was like, oh, no, it's North Dakota. I'm like, excuse me for confusing one of the 1,000 square states that we have in the Midwest with the other one. They all look the same on the map.
So, it's been an interesting couple of years. A lot of good and a lot of not so great. This year's been particularly very difficult. We've our congregation had a couple of significant losses as far as we lost in January. We lost a member who was very dear to us and one of my closest friends, and his name's Colin, and that was heck, I mean, I don't know. That's I'll carry that for the rest of my life, but that's probably not just the as far as being in ministry, the closest person I've ever lost, but the closest person I've ever lost, like, to me personally. Before Colin, I had lost some family members and stuff that I was close with, but this is someone that I talked to almost every other day and saw a lot and knew his children, and my wife and his wife were very close, and so that it's interesting. I wanted to go into ministry when I was like 14. I felt called, and I'm not going to go into that, but it was a whole story, but I don't care what age you are. God can call anyone at any age, but that was I didn't go into ministry when I was 14, but that was when I felt called. And really what I wanted to do was, I was inspired by these leaders at this youth camp I was attending. And I think the best way I can put it into words is I wanted to inspire people or empower people or make them want to follow God the way that they were making me want to follow God. I wanted what they had, right? And I just wanted to do that for others. I didn't just want to bask in God's glory. I wanted to, I guess, push other people on. And
right.
Anyway, that was kind of how I felt. I didn't realize that was a calling that God, but I didn't start that until I was like almost 30. So that's just how God works, right? He'll say, this is what you're going to do, or this is what I would like for you to do. And then years go by and it's like nothing. and then he shows up again. It's just, But what I'm getting at is that I don't think anybody, and I think I probably speak for everybody here, you're never, I don't care who you are if you're listening to this, and maybe you're somebody listening to this is like, I'm called and I want to go do this. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you, you can't imagine how ministry is actually going to look until you start. And that's what I've learned the past 2 years, is that there is a lot of difficulty, and there's also a tremendous amount of powerful, wonderful, blessed moments with the Lord. But I think I've learned more and more that it's not at all how you think it's going to look. And that has been, I think, the most... I was explaining to my wife last night, we were in a conversation, because I used to think that, and this was foolish for me to think, that it was almost like the military. Like, once you attain this rank, then these things are going to fall into place for you. And then once you keep going and then you attain this rank and everything, that is not at all the way it's been. I have learned, I have become much more of a student, and much more of a person that God has been teaching and changing in the past 2 years than when I was like 14, or when I was, young and growing up and just someone who was, not in ministry. And I was telling my wife last night, I said, even just the idea of, and I'm not trying to enter into a bigger conversation, but even just how I view Messianic Judaism as my expression of my love for God and my devotion to Him has changed, and God has been changing it to like, hey, you've had it here in your life and it's been this big to you. Let me actually show you what the most important thing is about ministry itself. The most important thing about me, like Messianic Judaism is a wonderful thing. These are wonderful things that I have, and they are my things, but it's not the thing. Mm-hmm. So that has been, I think, where I've been in general is, and you're not prepared for that, how much you actually continue to change, because you almost think, once I get to where I need to be, then I'll be ready to minister. And God's like, I've continued to change. I hope I'm growing.
Right.
There's a lot I need to work on, but I think it was just really staggering,
Yeah, I recently passed my 40 years in ministry, and I wrote a book based on it, but I'm not promoting the book, or I don't want to focus on that. But what I did do is I had this experience with the Lord where in moments, it may have been, who knows how long it was, but the Lord kind of gave me a life video, of my ministry, kind of brought me through from where I was when I began to, and what I thought where I began, what success was, what ministry was supposed to be, what connections with other people, who was important, who was unimportant, those kind of things as I started my ministry out, and then how I view those things now, and how many of the things that I thought were absolutes when I first started at 19 years old, and started out actually about 22 when I started in ministry, but to now, and how much broader the body of Messiah is than the small group of people that I thought were the only ones back then. And those things, and the other thing that I was thinking about was how often I went into things for the Lord with one expectation or one goal, and then came out of that time, that season, that experience, that thing with something completely different. For instance, just recently I was teaching at a conference, and when you go in to teach for a conference, you have expectations, like you're preparing your lesson with the hope of an outcome. People are going to receive this, they're going to learn this, there's going to be interaction. And the most meaningful interaction in the entire conference that I had was with an 11-year-old boy who was in the class, who wasn't even supposed to be there. He came in because he wasn't feeling comfortable in the children's program. He was too mature for the children's program, not mature enough to be in the teen program. And so he, age-wise and stuff, there's rules. So he came and sat in my class, and he asked a question in the class that changed the entire class. And it was like I had all kinds of thoughts in my head about what my goals, what I wanted to be the results of that class. But that one 11-year-old boy made that class what God wanted it to be apart from me. Like I was a tool God used, a vessel God used rather than the teacher, and it was so powerful. And you look back over the last couple of years, and I see so many times that the Lord brought us, all four of us, to different places and different times to achieve things that we'd have never thought would be the outcome of those things.
Right, and the thing is too, when I go back over the last 2 years, or even just ministry, how God has used, by His grace, hopefully used me in the past like 20 years, which is about how long I've been doing ministry. I look at, and I have a tendency to have this problem anyway, and it's not good, but I always have a tendency, and I think it's human nature, we just look at where we failed, or we look at where we didn't do so great. We because I think if we're honest with ourselves, I think we need to be honest about the things that God has taken us through, and we learned something and grew. But I'm telling you that there are seasons in my life that God has taken me through, and He actually took me through it and then ended the test or the time of trial, and God was like, you didn't grow the way you were supposed to through that. I took you through that, and you came out of it the same. And that kind of cuts you at the knees, and that's just, God does that. He's very honest with us because He loves us. So, and I think one big thing for me, and I think one way that I've grown is when I first started ministry, my sole goal was to simply impress anybody in leadership over me. I just wanted to impress them. I just wanted to do well for them. And if it seemed like they weren't, really regarding what I did, I would just fall apart. Literally, like if I was leading worship and the rabbi left the sanctuary for some reason, even if it was used a bathroom, I thought I failed. I mean, that's just, I'm being very honest. I mean, we're talking about, the human side of us. Let me tell you something. I led worship this past week at CMC because I'm kind of the unofficial backup until Brooke is in the process of prayerfully raising someone up to be like an alternate worship leader. But until then, to give her about a week off every month, I'll lead worship. And I led worship this past week, and it felt so freeing. And I felt like God said, why did that feel so freeing? Now, God knows the answer. I said, it felt so freeing because I wasn't concerned with impressing anybody. And God said, that's really it.
And just as a side note, I actually watched y'all's service online, and the worship was amazing. Yeah. And the message was strong and powerful.
And God said, and God doesn't,
you did good too, buddy.
And God's not petty, and God isn't condemning. He's gentle and He's humble in heart, right? And He said to me, and it was really powerful, He said, I'm not trying to make you feel bad, but I would have loved for you to have received that revelation when you were an actual worship leader. Mm-hmm. Now you're not one, you're just an alternate, and you finally get it. And God said, but you got it. Right?
But on the plus side is the fact that you now see it. You're in a different place of ministry, so hopefully that also translates into what you're doing now too, which is beautiful.
Yeah.
So
absolutely, no, yeah. And I don't mean that you shouldn't want to. You should want to please and respect and fall in with, but you got to have them in the right place. Yeah. I had like leadership and rabbis in like the place of God. Mm-hmm. If they weren't, and that I don't think that God was angry or gritting His teeth at me. I think He was sad. I think, and I just want to say,
good.
I think when we read things in the Bible, you have to understand we don't hear the way God's saying things, but when I read the prophets talking about His sin, I think when God dealt consequences to David for what he did with Bathsheba, I think sometimes we think that God's going, hey, now you're going to do this, and now I'm going to do this, and now I'm going to do this. And I said, have you ever considered that maybe God is weeping and grieved and his heart's turning over when we're not where we need to be? I think there's a desperate love there. I don't think that God's a doormat. I don't think that he's just this basket case. But I don't think he's angry all the time either. And I just really received that revelation when he spoke to me yesterday. He said...
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting because I can relate, when I first started in ministry, I was in the same, and you said you raised men up like God. I think
yes.
in my mind it's more that we raise men up like the children of Israel did to Moses, where
right.
the only way to please God is to please that person, and somehow they're in that track that, so if the people that we're trying to impress are not impressed, we feel like somehow God can't be impressed by what we're doing, and there are intermediary between us and God, that if we don't please them, they'll be able to stop God's anointing and
right.
blessing in our life. So we need to do something to make them happy or
right.
to do that. And I remember that all the way back to the very first time that I preached, which was so many years ago. I had preached and done nursing home ministry for a number of years. My wife and I went to a nursing home 6 times a week. We went to different nursing homes. And during that time, I would prepare my messages the same way I do now. I have a little bit of notes on a 3x5 card, and that's it.
I like the liberal use of prepare.
Right. So
I'm not going to say anything.
But because I had been invited to speak at a church, to an actual church instead of to a small group of people in a nursing home, I felt like, okay, I have to do different. And so I wrote out the entire manuscript and highlighted everything and tabbed everything in my Bible, and I had worked up this whole thing like I was giving a presentation for a doctorate thesis or whatever, And then as I left the house, I left my Bible and the notes at the house, and didn't know it till I got to the church, which was more than an hour away. And then I had to use my wife's Bible, which is a big print Bible, and nothing's on the right page in it and all that. And I was so upset because I thought I'm going to fail because I didn't do different than I was doing. And the Lord kind of spoke to my heart and said, why are these people different to you than other people? When you were speaking to people, are they not souls? Are they, the people
right.
in the nursing home, are they? And if you were anointed doing what you were doing, if I was using you the way you were, why do you think you have to change because this is a different venue or a different thing? And we get in our own minds where we think certain things are more important, certain people
right.
are more important than other people, when to God, he's not a respecter of persons, and he expects us not to be.
No, and I think that's the challenge of leadership. And I don't like to plug TV shows. I do love The Chosen. I'm not saying I know it's a TV show. I'm just saying, and I'll throw this out there, but there was a line from the show that has stuck with me ever since I heard it. I think I've thought of it every single day. It was when the disciples had been sent out 2 by 2s, and then they came back, and I love that scene because they're amazed that they're like, oh my gosh, we're doing it. We're doing it. They're doing miracles and stuff like that. And then they come back and they talk about it. And Big James is one of the disciples. You would think that after doing this, they would come back and they would sit together and be like, can you believe this happened? Man, this was awesome. This was like it's a summer youth camp. And, oh, we did this and it was such a wonderful prayer time. Or, oh, we did this and we prayed for somebody. And, oh, we just felt the presence of God. It wasn't like that at all. They were mortified. They couldn't believe what they were doing. And Big James said, he goes, I was teaching things that I myself don't live up to. I feel like a phony. And I was like, God, that is exactly the burden of leadership. And I was like, that is so powerful. That is so important for anybody who's leading. I don't care if it's one person or 1,000 people. That is so important to remember.
Right, and yeah. I think that we strive to live up to.
No, yeah.
When we're preaching about prayer, and teaching about prayer, every one of us knows we could pray more.
Yeah.
So when we're telling people you need to pray more, we're talking to ourselves,
yes.
and in some way there's a little tinge of guilt because we're teaching something that we know we haven't done as well as we could do. Fasting, the same thing. Worship. We'll talk to our people about worshiping and how you have to enter into worship, but I cannot tell you the number of times that while worship is happening at my synagogue, I'm dealing with something else or whatever, and so then I get up and I tell people, well, I hope you got into worship. I hope when I know that I wasn't even there.
Yeah, you got to leave this stuff at the door, and then you take your stuff in. No, I've done it. I mean,
so it's not hypocritical. We're not saying that we're preaching to others what we're not doing, but we know there's a tinge or at least a truth that we could all do better, and yet God still chose us to teach and share, even though He knows we're fallible.
Yeah. And I think that's the key to it, is that we don't have it all together. We don't have all the answers. We don't, the reality is, and I talk about it quite a bit at CMC, is when I get up to speak, it has to be a message God's already spoken to me about. Like, it has to be something God's already dealt with my heart on, or else it is that hypocritical kind of and I mean, not that everything is that way, but that's the kind of the approach that I've always had with it. Now, I want to shift the conversation just a little bit, and I think some of what we've been talking about kind of flows towards this too, and that's that each of us are at very different stages in our own personal lives, in particular with our families, right? So Rabbi Eric, as most of our listeners know, is my father. So Rabbi Eric's got a couple of kids. They're both grown on their own, have their own families. My brother and I both have our own kids. I have two kids who are now both teenagers. Rabbi Toby's got two kids who are elementary age, and then Rabbi Jonathan has one kid so far, and is still in the toddler phase. So in our own homes and our own lives, we have various phases that we're all in. And one of the things that I think is really intriguing for me, and this is something my wife and I have talked about quite a bit in recent months, is my son just started his freshman year of high school this week. And now both my kids are homeschooled, so they start whenever we want them to start. They get to start a little later than some of their peers, and or earlier than some, depending on where they're at. But nonetheless, my son just started his freshman year this year, and my daughter just started her sophomore year this year. And so my wife and I are like, we're in this really weird phase because now both of our kids are in high school, which has its own set of circumstances and concerns and what have you. But also at the same time, it's kind of weird for us to some degree because we're in a phase in life with our kids that is very unfamiliar territory. And we have to deal with that territory with two of them at the same time. And it's not even like, my daughter really didn't give us a very big gap, because my kids are only 22 months apart. So there wasn't a big gap to figure out how to handle teenagers before we had two of them. And then on top of that, one is a female and one is a male. So it's entirely two different types of teenagers to add to it. And then on top of that is that both of our kids were very young when we started Maim Chaim. As a matter of fact, my son had his first birthday 2 months after we started the congregation. And so he's very literally grown up in the congregation. And so we're in this weird place where we're watching our kids grow up rapidly around us. We're watching kids in the synagogue that grew up with them grow up rapidly around us. And we're watching as they're starting to kind of make their own life. They're starting to learn how to make decisions that, one, hopefully are good decisions, but two, will likely impact them for years to come in one way or the other, positive or negative. But also as they're drawing closer and closer to a exit from our not our life, but our home in one way or another, whether literally they move out when they're 18 or 19, or if they stick around a little while, but they're having their own life kind of separate from us. And so we're looking at it going, okay, well, we got 2-3 years, 5 years max, and neither my wife or myself will be in our 50s when our kids are making their own life. So we actually have a life to look forward to after kids. Not that we don't look forward to life with our kids, but it's this weird juxtaposition of we have kids who we love, who very literally are miracle kids. Medically, we were told we would never have kids, and here we have 2 kids that are absolutely miracle kids that we absolutely love. We love having around us, and they've been around us for years now. And then there's also this side of it where they really want to spend more time with other people than they do us, which is also kind of cool, because there are definitely times we want to spend time with somebody other than our kids too. But I know you guys are all in different phases. Rabbi Eric is in an entirely different phase because me and my brother are long out of the house and what have you. But we all have our own families. We have our own things going on in our own life. And I think the truth of the matter is, in a lot of ways, I don't know that our congregants in a lot of ways see us as anything other than the rabbi. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, it's a weird way to word it, but I think there is definitely this notion that we don't have our own life, right? That everything we do is about the congregation. And one of the things for us that's really difficult, and it's not as difficult now because our kids are a little older, but when they were little, like, we actually had to really think through whether or not we could go meet with somebody or not, or how we were going to manipulate things to be able to meet with somebody or whatever. Whereas your congregants kind of expect if they need something, you got to drop it right then and there. Right. And then as families, we having our own families, we also have to learn, and by no means have I figured it out yet, but we also have to learn how to set healthy expectations for our congregation, that they're not going to destroy our family. Like, our family comes first. I think that's one of the most important aspects of what Paul says in Timothy, that you've got to have your house in order. It's not that your family has to be perfect, but your family has to be an example, right? And if you can't put your family first, if you can't be there in ministry for your family first, then why are you pretending like you can be there for your congregation? Right. And I think a lot of times our congregants don't necessarily think about it that way.
I was going to say, a good way that I've seen this or looked at it is that our congregants see us kind of like an episode of a TV show that they watch once a week or twice a week. And they don't, so say they see the service, they see us teaching, they see us doing those things, and then they leave and participate in their own life, but they really don't think often about what happens in our world with our families the rest of the time, just like we wouldn't think about the character from a TV show between one week to the next week. We just want them to do what we want them to do on the program that we're watching. And so that's something that we've worked, especially over the last few years, at interacting with that and going to the theme of where we are in life. And I hope Jonathan and Toby will join in with this part of the conversation too. But 2 years ago, when we started this podcast, I was still in my late 50s. Now I'm 62. So I'm right at, and during that 2 years, I've kind of looked at my life, looked at my grandkids, thought about the fact that, in a couple of years, my granddaughter's, the oldest one's going to get married. And a couple, 9 years from now, my youngest one, or 10 years from now, my youngest one is going to be graduating from high school, and life is going to be significantly different. But the reality is, my wife and I, if God is gracious to us, have 30 years, 25, 30 years to live. And so we've adjusted our life so that, we've looked and we said, we've served, we've ministered, we love what we do. I'm not looking to stop doing what I'm doing or anything like that, but I'm also investing into things with my wife and I. Like, we have purposed to take a couple of days every month and just go away by ourselves and spend time just together. And sometimes we go with other people, but it's away from the congregation, away from expectations of the congregation, and spending time with us, because I realize I'm married for 43 years. I have maybe 20, 25, 30 years left, if both of us live and are healthy, to do the things we want to do and spend time with each other and invest in who we are. And that's not putting aside, because we still spend time with our grandchildren, we still spend time with our children, we still do those things, but we want to not lose ourselves in that. And when you're in ministry, especially in Messianic ministry for the time that I was, Messianic ministry has grown so much since I've been in, that being in Messianic ministry by choice made you have limited resources. It wasn't it wasn't like, my mom would say before she even became a believer, I wish if you had to be a Christian, you'd have been a Presbyterian. At least they get paid well.
Right.
And so there's this. So we didn't have the resources to do a lot of things, and my children did without a lot of the things that their friends had because we just didn't have. Now we've got to a place where we do have a few. We're not wealthy by any means, but we've been wise with our finances. We're not heavily in debt, and we're able to do things a little more. And we're also at a place where I get invited to go speak places. Like I could go somewhere every week and not run out of places to go, but I'm at a place in my life where I don't want to. I want to spend time with my wife. I want her to go places with me. So where it used to be when I was young and I was desperate and I had to have money, and one of the ways to supplement my income was going to speak somewhere, I wasn't getting invited because I didn't have any kind of notoriety or name or platform or whatever the word is to do that. Now people know a little bit who I am and I get invited. But now I'm much more particular about when and where I go because I don't want to give up the time with my family or my wife or even my local congregation people that I want to invest in. So the last couple of years, that's been a serious change in my ministry, in my life, and partially because when you hit 60, you're like, dude, people my age are dying.
Right.
I only have a limited amount of time to do what I'm doing, and especially after the COVID years and so many people doing, that I changed fundamentally my choices about. Now, it doesn't mean I diminished my ministry or I'm not active doing things, but I'm just making choices that honestly I wish when I was younger I had made some of those choices and chose my children or my wife or my local congregation over other things.
Yeah.
For me, I think one of the good things, at least where I'm at now, is because once your kids grow out of being babies, they start to become like people, like that you start to see them develop their individuality and all that. So, and that's really when I started to notice, I think in a good way, how I think that, and how I think that I've been able to give my children things that I didn't have, and that is not disparaging my parents, but you do hope that your children will be able to give their children better than what you gave them. I mean, you want your children to excel,
right?
I told my son recently, I said, I want you to be better than me,
right?
Sooner than
it's like the unspoken social contract with everyone is you want everyone's children to do, the next generation needs to do better,
right? The next generation needs to do better. I want my son to pursue the Lord harder than I did, sooner than I did, without the certain obstacles that I had, whether they were circumstances from life or just things that I did.
Right.
But I think that at the same time, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but I think being able to, we do homeschool our children. I'm not against public school. I'm a product of public school. I know that, however, there were things that I did experience in public school that I dreaded and hated, and it made me not want to go, and those kinds of things. And the Lord opened up an opportunity to homeschool our children, and my son loves it. My daughter only went to pre-K in public school before she was homeschooled, so she had fun with it. So she misses school. My son doesn't. But I think that there is a benefit of homeschooling your children. But one of the things that I love is just the fact that my son can do work on his pace. He doesn't have to deal with, I know one year at school he got bullied, and he didn't tell me that until like later on, and that tore my heart up, He can stand while he does his work because he likes to stand and kind of fidget while he does his work. He's a boy. Right. Yeah. But he always got in trouble for wanting to stand up, and do his work. So that level of stress he doesn't deal with. And I'm like, okay, God, you've given him something that even I didn't have. Even being able for him to learn Hebrew, which we weren't called in the Messianic movement when I was his age. We didn't even know what it was. But I'm like, okay, God, I'm seeing you bring growth in my family because I'm seeing my children benefit from the things that I didn't have. And that's been really, really reassuring. And also just the fact that, when I grew up, my dad worked shifts. So I have memories of my dad putting me to bed at night and saying good night and stuff, but not every single night. I'm able to do that with my children, and
right.
So I think seeing that, and then being in ministry and being able to take an active role in how my children are raised in the ways of the Lord and giving them opportunities that I didn't have has been the best blessing in this stage. Seeing them become individuals but also being able to, I think, give them the opportunities that I didn't have. And I'm not jealous of that. I mean, if I had a choice, if God said, do you want it or do you want me to hold on to it for your kid? I'd say, hold on to it for my kid. And I think that should be all of our,
Let me bank that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's, it's funny because I'm in this season of life where I'm, and maybe just because, I'm a young husband, like I'm still freshly married, Catherine and I have only been married 3 years. And we have one baby boy thus far that I'm, as they say, grinding a lot. Like I'm constantly doing other things. Craig, one of our congregants here, he teases me all the time because he's like, "How many jobs do you have?" And I'm like, "Well, I mean, they're like side gigs, but like 3 or 4 others." I stay busy constantly, and so when I find myself not busy, I elect more often than not now just to go home because I'm like, I want to be with my wife and my baby boy. Because there's, and it's not that I don't make time for like social things outside of synagogue. Like on the Labor Day evening, I went and joined a couple friends for cigars, within reasonably close distance to my house. Just for a few hours, and was like, we planned this like a month ago. Like this is, I'm gonna actually attend this thing instead of doing, because when I was younger, it was a little more off the wall. Like I could commit to things, just without even really thinking about it because it was just me. And then even when I first got married, I would just ask Catherine. She'd be like, "Yeah, it's fine. Like I'll see you when you get home," and no big deal. But now, it's more important for me to be home. So more often than not, like especially during the weekdays, if I'm caught up on notes and studying for teachings or messages, I'm just like, no, I've done all I can today with this, and I'm going to go home. Because
important.
Yeah, and I think I had a really good. I've grown a lot closer to my mom in the last couple of years. We had a pretty strenuous relationship in my college years, but we've grown closer the last few years. And we had a really good conversation the other day that, the way people view work is changing, mostly because of technology. Everything moves at such a faster pace that it's. People are shifting, and I can even, my own mind shifts in this direction. It's like, if you're done with the work, like call it be done. Like there's no, we don't work in factories anymore. We're actually shifting, ironically, out of the industrial era. We're leaving the idea of like, it's a set time to a set time. It's like, do what you got to do. If it's done, go be productive elsewhere. And again, like, David's even said, if you're not productive with your family, like what business do you have being productive with a congregation? That's a lesson I've been dwelling on and learning and practicing better, I think, over the last couple of years, definitely since we started. Because it's important, and especially as we look to hopefully have more children, that will be even more important.
So in the last 2 years, what's been the biggest positive that's happened in your life, in your congregation, et cetera, and what's been probably the hardest thing to work through?
I would say that the best thing has been I'm really, I think the best thing has been over the past 2 years is at CMC, at least from a ministry perspective, is to see the congregation grow and bear fruit in the way that it has, and it's been very slow and gradual. It's not been like a sharp turn, which with God it rarely is. It's been very fulfilling, and seeing that we have a congregation that's close knit and that people sincerely love each other and love being around each other, and they truly love God. Most importantly, they really are there for the Lord. I mean, it's kind of hard to be a part of I would say compared to a lot of churches and stuff, the Messianic, like most Messianic synagogues, are fairly small. So in my experience, most people don't attend, especially a Messianic synagogue, because they have some kind of agenda, even though you can find those people there. But a lot of people are there because they're pursuing the Lord. And that has been really awesome to see the growth over the past 2 years, because we have seen growth and we have seen fruit. And the B'nai Mitzvah program is something I have been very excited about. That was as far as a tangible thing, and seeing the response. And again, I wasn't bar mitzvahed, and I say this a lot, or at least I say it to my wife. I said, only God would take some Southern Baptist kid, from Georgia, and now I'm, who was never bar mitzvahed, who didn't even know what the heck that was. And now I'm able to, God has, so graciously developed me over the past few years to the point where I can be at, where I can do that to give to this next generation, what I didn't have. So that's been really exciting. Well, the toughest thing is easy. I mentioned it earlier, the first 6 months.
It's God's, right? And if God is in...
All right, this year has also paralleled with a lot. It's like, Job said,
Thank you for listening to the MessianTics
we can't just accept
Podcast. Make sure to subscribe so you can be notified every time we drop a new episode. And be sure to follow and interact with us on social media at MessianTics Podcast.
It's an equal opportunity harasser is what I say about life. But there has certainly been beauty in the ashes, I guess you could say.
Life doesn't come with a Title IX agreement.
Right. It's not been all sackcloth or whatever. No, it's true. I think that's the most gripping thing about life with God, is that he is brutally honest about how difficult life is. Yeah. And some things he's grievously silent about things, and it's like, why? And it's like nothing. You don't get every answer, But then again... We're not supposed to know answers, but that's been tough, of course. That's an easy one. But the best thing, I think, has been the slowly ever increasing fruit. And it's been kind of exponential, and I'm looking forward to seeing what God does with that, of course. So,
I guess the most difficult thing has been loss, and both loss. We lost our oldest member. She was 105. Over the last little bit, we lost a number of other people. We've lost people for moving, transitioning. Very difficult situation watching some people that I love and care about self-destruct their lives. Very difficult as somebody who loves people and loves their congregants and wants them to do well and be blessed. Watching people purposefully self-destruct is very difficult. So that would be the worst part. The best part of it is, honestly, having Rabbi Jonathan and Catherine and other people that have taken key positions within our community that allows me to have some release from some certain obligations and responsibilities that then allows me to go spend time with my wife or my family and things like that. It's amazing. You don't think about it very much, but the webs of ministry that hold you in place, if you're the only one to do something, that having some help. I mean, we have amazing people. Like I said, Rabbi Jonathan and his wife Catherine, the people that work in our office, Hosanna and Holly and MJ and Leah and Rivka and others that help teach. We have people who are qualified to teach, to do studies, to do things, to help with our B'nai Mitzvot program, to do all the things that I had to do and carry on my own, not having those tethers, still having leadership and guidance, but not the responsibility to be at everything, is amazingly freeing, to be able to go do and to get to a place where you can trust God enough so that you can trust others to do those things is probably, if you're asking me what the best thing over the last couple of years, it's getting to that place where I can go away for 3 days without being concerned, or it's got to the place where when I'm away on a Saturday because I'm somewhere else or on vacation or whatever, that I don't have to worry that nobody's going to be at the synagogue because I'm not there. Now, if I'm not there and Rabbi Jonathan's there, just as many people come as before. So that freedom that comes from that major transition and release of responsibility into disciples, into people that have been discipled to do things, is probably my best thing.
Yeah. I know, it's funny, like looking at the schedule in this week's staff meeting, like we're already looking forward into next year's months, and I think there's 1 month where you're going to be gone like at least half the month. Like you're going to be gone and now quite a while, but things will go on. Like we'll continue to have service, we'll continue to have Tuesday nights.
Now, if only you can get him not to call in to check on things while he's out of town.
I think
that would be what Hosanna would say. Yeah.
But it's the mark of a healthy congregation. I don't want to shift the conversation too far away, but I do want to make this point. It's the mark of a healthy congregation if that's happening.
Yeah.
If just as many people show up, if the senior leader, that's the mark of a healthy congregation, because that means they're there because they value, one, the Lord, and two, the community at large, writ large.
Right.
I've seen that not happen. I've seen people literally empty. I've seen literally empty congregations because the senior leader is not there. And I think that the responsibility is on both the leader to develop the community that way.
Right.
But yes, it's not entirely the leader's fault if somebody's like, well, because blank's not here, I'm leaving.
Right.
But I do think you can create an atmosphere and a culture that's conducive to it not mattering if the senior leader's there or not,
Right.
But you're always also just going to have those people who they just want what they want when they show up. And I think if your congregation's healthy, those people are easy to pick out, and they don't last very long in general.
No.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that's why one of my, probably the best thing that's happened over the last couple years and relatively recently is we have begun to drastically expand our circle of people who are involved in teaching. The reality of a synagogue is that we call it a shul for a reason. School. It is to be prayed in and worshipped half the time, and the other half the time it should be a place of fellowship and education. It should be a place where you are not only fed, like literally, which we do quite often, but you should be fed with the information, the knowledge that's going to bring you to wisdom, in being a person of God. And so, we've got several qualified people within our congregate within our walls. We've got people who are faithful husbands and fathers and have been so for many years. We've got people who have the higher actual accredited higher education. We have a gentleman in our congregation who has his doctorate in biblical studies. And we invite him to teach. Occasionally people, and because we need to have. We're not a personality cult. It's not a personality cult around Rabbi Eric or Rabbi Jonathan. It is a personality cult around one person, and that's Yeshua. And there are many people that Yeshua calls and brings to. Maybe they're not in ministerial leadership but they can teach and they can give you information that's going to be helpful. And so we've been expanding that circle to bring them in, especially on things like Tuesday nights, where we do a lot of our studies. And so that's why I always encourage people, look, if you can't make the Bible, the Torah studies on the other nights of the weeks at the coffee shops, come to Tuesday night.
Right.
Like that, at least be here Saturday and Tuesday. Those are the big. That's where you're going to really learn and grow. So that's probably the best thing that we've done within recent months. The worst thing in the past couple of years, for me, and I'm sure this is shared easily, was the response across the whole Messianic Judaism to the events of October 7th. Easily has been one of the worst things to watch, because what transpired on October 7th was bad enough. But to watch the opportunity to come together as a whole, as Messianic leaders, like where was that? Right. With 9/11, we watched the world come together, in solidarity with the United States, watching as thousands of people died and suffered. October 7th, we watched the same thing. And we look and the same bickering over the same minutia, appears and becomes the talking points of the forums and the email chains and the videos. And like, where are we going with this? We just watched what could be considered the greatest tragedy in the last decade happen, like just globally. And we continue to bicker amongst ourselves. We can't even get together to talk and pray about this colloquially. So watching that has been probably the worst thing to have watched, because it really, we missed an opportunity to step up not only in front of the Christian world, but in front of the Jewish world, and to show that we are united.
And there's a reality that, and we keep hearing leaders within the movement quote, "We're the head, not the tail.
Right.
We're the head, not the tail."
Prove it.
October 7th, on October 8th, the Messianic Jewish movement should have unified at the head of the body of Messiah.
Right.
And we would not have seen the things like what happened at Columbia, what happened in Texas, what happened in California. If we had the millions of people that claim to be Bible believers who claim to love Israel,
right,
if they had been led into a right demonstration of support for Israel, we would have so overwhelmed the naysayers. But we missed the opportunity because and this is my opinion, but I think it comes down to who gets the credit. Who's going to be in charge? Who's going to be the spokesperson? Who's, instead of unifying and saying we are the Messianic Jewish movement, and stepping out to this. So I agree that I didn't even put that in that mind. But the reality is that that we as the movement, and that's the two main organizations and the many sub-organizations, smaller organizations that are. That agree with our statement of faith, that agree with the things that we say we believe, that are but aren't part of a unified organization. They're independent for whatever reason. Should be able to, when it comes to the absolute terrorist attempt at annihilating people in Israel, we should have been able to put aside the bickering and stood shoulder to shoulder and led the body of Messiah to stand up for Israel, right, and biblical precepts and values.
Yeah, I know we're approaching an hour, but I just want to say this because it's just kind of true. I think when I imagine what it was like to welcome the Apostle Paul into the faith, this guy was horrible. I mean, imagine in a movie, he was the bad guy.
Yeah.
The worst.
Yeah, he was the bad guy.
He was the bad guy. And then not only does he change sides, he changes sides and becomes one of its greatest champions.
Yeah.
And one of its greatest, for lack of a better word, heroes. And has, I mean, when he's, I would say more than Yeshua, Paul is quoted, he's probably second place.
Yeah, quoted, I was saying in my message this last Shabbat that Paul becomes the most prolific early writer for the believers.
And you have to think of who he was. But you have to also look at, it wasn't just Paul, but it was the believers in Acts. It was the apostles that welcomed him and forgave him and restored, and I would say, restored, but they gave him that space, and they rejoiced over it. And I wonder, could that happen today in our movement today? And I don't know. And that's what bothers me. Could you have an absolute villain come over, and then not only are we going to forgive you, but we're going to give you an opportunity to be a champion? And because it's so much more fun to hate people nowadays, I don't know. So.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So as we get ready to wrap out today, I think for me the big items, the best things, like the good moments and all, over the last couple of years, both of my kids became B'nai Mitzvot, which was a very, and oddly enough, it worked out that Rabbi Toby actually spoke at both of them, did the message for both of those services, but and very adeptly catered the sermon to them and to their life. I mean, it also spoke to everybody, but it was very intentionally catered to each of them. Aside from that, piggybacking on what Rabbi Toby said, watching our congregation grow in the last couple of years has been insane. Our congregation has always grown. I liken it to this, not like I've likened it this way before, something I was thinking about while he was talking. When my wife and I first started dating, or most of the time that we were dating, her parents had I think it was a 78 Lincoln Continental Mark 8, which is this massive land barge sedan, right? It was 2 doors, but the each of the door, driver's side, passenger side, each of the door was as big as 2 doors on a normal sedan today. But it was this massive 2-door vehicle, but had captain seats in the front, bench seat in the rear. You could still fit like 8 people in there comfortably. And it was huge. Had this massive V8. It had plenty of power. You could jump on the throttle and it would just haul. Right? But when you did that, you would watch the gas needle just steadily hit the bottom. Like, you full tank of gas, you jump on the gas at a green light, and you just watch it steadily drop. But at the same time, you could take that vehicle, the full tank of gas, and you could slowly inch it up and get up to speed, up to like highway speed, and it wouldn't just bottom out. It would run like a nice and smooth. You ultimately get to highway speed. You can hold highway speed, and that tank will last a lot longer, right? Mm-hmm. And that's kind of how I've seen growth at CMC over the years. Is it's steady and steady incline. Nothing crazy. Like, we don't all of a sudden one week have 350 people when the week before we had 25. It's not a fad thing that's happening that people are coming into, but it's, God will bring a few people in, they'll get solidified, they'll get comfortable, they'll become part of the core, and then he'll bring a few more in, and then they'll get solidified, and so on. And so it's like that big Lincoln Mark 8, that as long as you push the throttle steadily and get up to speed, it'll run for a couple 100 miles on that tank with no problem at all. But if you try to gun it and just get as quick as you can, you're going to run out of gas, run out of steam, run out of everything, and you have nothing left in the end. And so it's been really encouraging there.
Got to pace it. Exactly.
But I think ultimately the biggest thing, outside of my kids becoming B'nai Mitzvot, the biggest thing in my opinion, for me, was actually Rabbi Toby and Brooke coming into CMC, because for a lot of reasons. One is it was such a long time coming to get there, and being able to work with one of my closest friends in the world in ministry has been phenomenal. But aside from that, watching them come into their own, and the ability to be able to not be responsible for everything anymore. It was a one-man show for years, and being able to have somebody help and take some of that weight and run with it has been phenomenal. As far as downsides of things. I mean, Rabbi Toby covered some of the biggest things. The loss of Colin, who not only was a congregant but was a very, very good friend. The way about which it all transpired. I mean, it was just a really difficult first few months of the year, and then immediately after that, within a few weeks, we lost an older gentleman in the congregation, kind of out of the blue.
Yeah, Randy.
It was just, there were just a lot of things compounded on top of each other, and it just, this year has probably, and even considering that 2 years ago we started out with Toby and Brooke at CMC with an attempted split, which didn't materialize in anything, thankfully, but with an attempted split in the congregation, even considering that, I think this first 9 months of this year, or 8 months, as we're just now in the 9th month, the first 8 months of this year has been one of the most difficult in ministry. And there have been other things that have occurred, over the last year or two that have been kind of painful and what have you. But I think that was definitely the lowest point, the hardest thing to get through. And I am unhealthily really good at compartmentalizing things. So I'm able to just kind of push stuff aside and deal with it my own way at my own time.
You.
Either when I get around to dealing with it or when it finally boils over and I have no choice but to deal with it. But this has definitely been one of the most difficult things to get through in general. It's one of those things that you never want to have to go through, but if you've got to go through it, you hope you get to go through it with the right people.
Right.
And I think we have, in a lot of ways, watching our community rally around the family, it's just been mind-blowing watching how God's people, when actually living by God's word and putting, the fruit of the Spirit foremost, it's amazing watching what God will do in those situations. So with that said, we hope that this episode was a blessing to you, and look forward to this next year of the MessianTics podcast, and hopefully being a blessing into your lives. And let us know what your thoughts are. Let us know how your highs and lows of our episodes thus far. Let us know what you'd like to hear us talk about moving forward, and we will see you guys next week.